So I've been thinking about something. I've been thinking about where my abandonment issues come from. And I've been having to do a lot of introspection and things like that. I thought um, they came from my divorce, right? Um, but thinking more deeply, it did not. They existed long before my divorce. I think my marriage and subsequent divorce exacerbated it. I think it brought it um, to the surface, even though then I could not articulate why that time in my life was so devastating. Um, Clearly, because now I'm just now realizing, like, oh, um, that's where that came from. So let me tell you where it comes from. And this is a true story. Um, I grew up in a incredibly religious household. I was born into the last stages of a classically Pentecostal movement in America, independent holiness movement in America. And so my formative years were spent in church and steeped in um, that belief system and the religiosity that came with that. And for our tradition, it was a lot of rules. It was a lot of uh, laws and customs and rituals that if they weren't adhered to, then ultimately your experience with salvation is going to be a failure. And so, um, as a kid, they wanted to make sure that we were properly converted and receive salvation. And the method of doing that, the modality was to get kids in the sanctuary for youth night on a Friday night, and they would show us a series of rapture videos. Now, in context, much of the preaching was about hellfire and brimstone. And when I tell you these preachers were good at it, they were excellent at it. Like, you'd be sitting there and they'd be preaching about hell, and your clothes start smoking. Like, it just, they were really, really good at describing gnashing of teeth and hell and fire and brimstones and Satan and pitchforks and demons and torment and all of these things we were getting on Sunday morning. So Friday night just reinforced what the preacher was saying on Sunday morning. And so they get us on Friday night, turn all the lights off in the sanctuary, and show us these videos, not a series on Friday nights. They show us one at a time. And so one was called A Thief in the Night, that made us understand that Jesus was coming as a thief in the night, and you're going to be walking, and one is going to be taken and the other one is going to be left. And the way they crouched it onto me is that I was the one who was going to be left. And at 9, 10, I hadn't done anything, maybe lied about some homework. I mean, that was about the threshold of my sin. Was I didn't take out the garbage. I was disobedient to my parents. And because I didn't take out the garbage, I was going to burn in eternal fire. Another one was called The Crossbow and the Switchblade. And his name was Nicky Cruz, who came out with a series of videos about being saved and what happens if you die and you haven't received Jesus. And so if you show these films consecutive Friday, By the time they turn the lights off, you just got a bunch of scared kids. And the question is, does anybody want to be saved? Well, yeah, because, you know, of course, me, yeah, let's do this. So every Friday night, we was getting resaved. Because this was really scary stuff you was giving to kids. And so it made me at a very early age, because I was thoughtful. I felt and started to think that, first of all, there's no way for me to satisfy God. Ultimately, it doesn't matter how much I come to church. Ultimately, it seems like God gives me this exam that he wants me to fail. There's no way of passing this test, because I know I'm like, even at 9, 10, I'm not perfect. Like, if that's what he wants is perfection, then I'm not going to make it to heaven. And so it left me incredibly insecure about this ultimate relationship with God and the ultimate love that I think we can experience is from God. And I'm insecure about love, and I'm insecure about this relationship. So basically, every time we came to church after that, we were getting saved, like, because, I mean, we were kids, and so your head is full of mischief, and you're seeing what you can get away with, and God's going to catch you. So it was pretty exhausting. And so I grew up in an era where we were called, before we were generation whatever, we were latchkey kids. Latchkey kids was mean that your parents were working class people. More times than not, they were working, so they put one house key around your neck like a leash, and you tucked it in. And so when you got out of school at 3:15 for me, you let yourself in, you locked the door behind you. Some kind of way, one day, I had to be about 11. I let myself in the house, and I think about this time, my older brother was at another school. We went to elementary school together, but he's 2 years older, so he was at another school. So it was me. I came home alone. I let myself in the house, and even though I had a key, more times than not, somebody's always there. My mom is there, but this time she wasn't there. Searched all through the house. Nobody was home, so I called my grandmother, and I was deeply attached and in love with my grandmother. And I called her, and she wasn't there. And I remember sitting on the couch feeling incredibly afraid and scared, because in my mind, what had happened was the rapture had come. And now I'm alone. And I remember sitting on the couch thinking through all of that, and I cried and cried and cried and cried. And I prayed, and I said, God, what did I do? Like, I thought I was trying to do everything right. So that was one issue. The next issue is, how are you going to take Nash? Like, do you know Nash? You going to take Nash? You going to leave me? That didn't seem right. And I remember crying, praying, and I cried myself to sleep right there on the couch. And when I woke up, my mom was there. Nash was there. And I never talked about that experience. I never told them my fear and my anxiety, and looking back at it, my panic attack that I had that day, that was induced by my religious upbringing. And so it's rational to think, well, how can I be secure in any other love, in any other relationship, if I believe that God's plan for me is not to feel safe, but to be perpetually insecure, perpetually on my toes, and have anxiety about if I'm doing everything right, if I'm perfect enough for God's love, if not only what I did, but if I thought something wrong, in my thoughts, it's just he's reading everything. There's just no way. And so I got married very early, and I'm not pointing fingers or anything like that. It's two people, but we were kids, we were young. Didn't know each other enough to know these things, and I didn't even know how to articulate. Didn't know what was going on with me. But the reason I think it took me so much time to unravel myself post-divorce is that I didn't realize that I see love through anxious attachment, right? That and it affected me even when early on, that when I experienced people dying that I loved and I was in relationship with, I could not wrap my mind around how could they leave me, right? And it just, when you have abandonment issues, you become hyper fixated on being chosen. You become hyper fixated on people who say they love you, and you test that out by seeing if they stay. Because if you love me, you would stay with me no matter what. And when you have abandonment issues, you say to yourself, I'll work out anything. We could work out whatever we need to work out. Just don't leave me. I can't fix it if you go away from me. And so you got all of these things that you take into your adulthood, and it affects even how you engage the world. That if you apply for a job and you don't get the job, it hits your self-worth. Like, maybe I'm not worth, as a person, this corporation choosing me to be a part of that because they didn't want me. I experienced this even this past summer, which really triggered a lot of my going deeper, because I applied to some PhD programs, and they were prestigious programs, they were competitive programs, hyper competitive programs, and a couple of them I didn't get into it, and I started questioning whether or not I was smart, whether or not I was worth anything. Like, I didn't separate it from the fact, well, this is what you're trying to do is difficult. It's difficult for anybody. It's challenging. It's a leap. There are more candidates who are more qualified, just clearly more qualified, and can get into the program and do better immediately, whereby it might have took me some time to get acclimated. Like, I didn't take all of that. It was about me. And I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. And so if you can relate to any of these issues, I pray and I hope and I encourage you to find someone to talk to. I have spent a lot of time in therapy unraveling myself and untangling myself from all of that trauma theology and harmful religiosity, in order for me to get settled and secure in my relationship with God. Another thing is, I encourage you to do the work to decenter your ego. And when I say decenter your ego, I'm saying that everything that happens in your life is not about you, right? Um, and if you live your life where every no is a rejection of your person, well, you're going to be miserable because sometimes you don't get the job. Sometimes you don't get in the program. Sometimes you don't get the girl, or you don't get the guy, and things don't always work out in your favor. And if the only way for you to be happy in life is for everybody to tell you yes, then that's a deeper symptom of some other issues that you need to have. And you have to understand that sometimes there's just a better candidate. Sometimes somebody doesn't love you the way you want them to love you. Sometimes it's not the time for what you're going after right now, and you have to move your ego out of the way in order for you to find some contentment with life, and to understand that for things, they have a season, there's a purpose, and things are made beautiful in their own time. And sometimes that time is not the time you want to dictate. Two things that were pivotal. Two more things that were pivotal for me. As a young person in my early 20s, what it was pivotal and so instrumental in me settling into my relationship with God beyond my religious upbringing was that I came in contact with this man of God by the name of Arthur Brazier. And he's from Chicago, Woodlawn area. And one day I came across him teaching. He was a great teacher. He started teaching about the eternal security of the believer. And it just blew my mind to understand that God had made up his mind about me, and that I could finally rest. That God is not penalizing me because I miss church, or he's not he didn't go through all this trouble to send his only son, and his son didn't go through so much trouble in order to lose me to a bad thought, or a cigarette, or somebody's drug habit, or somebody's alcoholism, or somebody's queerness. Like, we are firmly and securely settled within God's love. And that was so revolutionary. I am so grateful for him. And what Bishop Pearson did was to further that idea that the purview of God sees us through the eyes of the Christ who he sent to die for us and to reconcile us. And beyond our religious upbringing, that Christ is greater than that, and that we are so completely loved, and that love is broad enough and deep enough and wide enough and passes our own knowledge to accept us just as we are. And I hope we all find security in God's love. It is a miserable thing to give your life to God and to serve God and to love God and think that perhaps God doesn't want me. And you get to those pearly gates, however you envision that, and he rejects you because of something you did in 1962 that you forgot about, but clearly he keeps a running tab on all our faults and going to reject us for that. And to understand that Christ's love paid it forward for us. I think that's powerful. I think it's meaningful. It's meaningful to me. I hope it's meaningful to you. But for all of us who are processing our faith and trying to reconcile our religious upbringing with how we understand ourselves and how we understand God now, I encourage you again, find you a therapist and work that out so you can live before God and with men and women and be at peace. Knowing God accepts you helps you accept other people. Knowing that God accepts me for my imperfections allows me to accept other people with their imperfections, and to understand that as God accepts me, He accepts them too. So my issue may not be your issue, and vice versa, but we all got something. And that's why the work of Christ is so powerful and so rich. And so I've become less superstitious and not saying my faith is transactional, not saying the love of God for me as strictly transactional, but more meted out through a perfect love. I hope we all can experience that. I tell the church all the time that knowing God may be our last chance to know what real love is. And if that be true, then we have to do the work to align ourselves with that love so we can receive it. So that's the story of my abandonment issues that I've worked a lot. Worked through it. You could be free. You can find yourself to a free and peaceful space. And I'm sure it's a lifelong journey to keep untangling myself and not going back and thinking those same old thoughts, but to see yourself new and see your relationship with God new. And it helps you see other people and your relationships in a new way. And so that's what I've been thinking about.